Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and as you would expect, I'm here with the co-founder of Catalyst Sale, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Jody.
All right, Mike, we've got a guest this week that I feel pretty good about. We've got a fellow Midwesterner. I'm from Illinois. Our guest is from Iowa, so just right across the river from each other, the Mississippi River. Our guest is Steve Wil. Steve has a lot of experience in sales leadership in the software and technology organizations. He's had titles like manager, director of sales, and whatnot. So, Mike, give us an introduction to Steve and why you asked him on the show.
Well, before I do that, you kind of threw me through a loop, Jody. Do you know why?
I don't know.
You said you were from Illinois. I thought you were from Peoria.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Obviously, Jody doesn't pay attention to his comments on the previous podcast, but there's a distinction between Peoria and Illinois, kind of like Austin and Texas. I thought.
No. Mike, you're way off. That's Chicago in Illinois.
Excuse me. So I stand corrected. Well, so I'm really excited to have Steve Wil on. Met Steve. I think we're pushing just a little bit over a year and a half ago through a relationship that we have with a company that Steve was previously with FunnelWise. And Steve, just excited to get you on the podcast. And I think the audience is really going to enjoy the perspective that you have on sales, what has led to the success of people that you've seen in this space, and just look forward to the conversation. Thanks for being here.
Mike, thanks for having me. I'm extremely excited to be here. And I'm not sure if Jody is aware of this, but Iowa is considered the Silicon Prairie. I'm sure you've heard of the Silicon Valley, but Iowa, come visit the Silicon Prairie. It's a great place to be.
Well, I have heard Iowa called a lot of things, but the Silicon Prairie is not one of them. So that's new to me.
Yes.
Now you have to put it on your list of reasons to go and t-shirts to get when you're in Iowa. So Steve, tell us, we've had a number of these conversations in the past. So I think that the best way to start is really when you think of success in sales, how would you define success in sales?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sales and sales leaders were so used to being measured, right? Measured on metrics like calls and demos and opportunities, and measured on pipeline and revenue and profitability. So, obviously that's the easy answer when it comes to being measured by sales is, are you hitting your number? Are you hitting your revenue growth? And that is key, right? In order to be successful, you need to make sure you're making your number. But there's also personal development when it comes to the art of sales and the science of sales. So I think being successful in your career, again, includes making your number. But continued success and motivation comes from always improving yourself when it comes to the art and science of sales.
So when you think of the art and science of sales, how do you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, that's another great question. Experience shows that sales or sales leaders, they often don't focus on both the art of sales and the science of sales. They're just different personalities, and different people tend to focus on one or the other. So I'll talk a little bit about the art first, because it's kind of where I cut my teeth. And that's, how you kind of get started in sales is you have to be good at that kind of stuff. And I think there's three pieces or three foundational elements with the art of sales. And one is you have to have the ability, you have to have the sales skills, you have to have the desire to develop those skills. And just as important, it has to be a desire to not just make a sale or make sales, but to solve problems for customers and really build those relationships. So that's the first piece of the art, is the sales skills. You also have to have knowledge, and that knowledge should revolve around your products, and they're probably always changing. So you always need to stay on top of those. And then the industry that you're selling into as well, industry slang or terms or acronyms, and really develop that expertise in the industry so you're credible with your customers and prospects. So to narrow it down, Mike, there's three key factors to being successful with the art, and that is product knowledge, industry knowledge, and sales skills.
So when you think about industry knowledge, what are some resources that you would leverage to gather industry knowledge? And you can pick a specific industry and go deep into that, or just talk in generalities. But where do you go to gather more information about a given industry?
Your best source of information is prospects and customers and peers. Sales reps and sales leaders always want to be credible, right? You have to be credible when you're talking to your prospects and customers. That builds trust. And if you don't exhibit some sort of, what's what I'm looking for, maybe not humility, but interest in learning about the individual space and the industry, you're kind of lose that credibility. So I have found in my experience that talk to your peers, whether it's your sales leadership peers, your sales management peers, or even your sales rep peers, and then ask the customers too, what's going on in their industry, what's changing, what are the common catchphrases. And I think that really, I'm speaking from experience in two sectors. One is the construction space. That's really where I cut my teeth on software as a service back at Submittal Exchange. And man, those construction folks, they have a language all their own. I don't mean the colorful kind, but just all the different acronyms and abbreviations they use. And, when you were new to that space, you just had to ask questions. And then the second piece was the technology space with marketing automation and CRM. And again, there's no educational course. You can't go to school to receive a degree in sales. So you have to, OJT, on the job training, and speak to your peers and prospects and customers.
One of the questions I like to ask when I'm talking to prospects and customers about it is, where do they go for information? The more I can learn from them about the sources that they lean on, whether those sources could be industry journals, industry websites, peers, or thought leaders or experts in a given industry. Don't hesitate to ask your client or your prospect for feedback and just get a sense from them on where they go for information.
Yeah. And another good place along those lines is, if there's not just trade shows, but certification classes or courses for continuing ed for that industry as well, even though that might not be your particular job, if your job is in sales, but go to those resources and attend those classes and training. Great place to network, great place for having some knowledge dropped as well.
So how about on the product side? So let's say I'm a new rep and I've gone through all of the information related to all the stuff that our marketing team has put together on the product. What are some ways that I can get a better understanding of the product functionally as I'm working on still on this art side of the equation?
That was not a question I was expecting, but that's a home run right there. And specific examples that I can speak to, growing a sales team a few years ago, again, at a company called Submittal Exchange, not only was there the training program, so the new sales rep would go through the training program and we teach them about product knowledge. We would send them to a customer location. So we did have customers locally. So we would send them to a customer location, have them sit down with the customer as the customer would allow and go through the day on how the customer actually used the product or products. That really was the best source of information because, of course, we could tell them how we thought it should be discussed and how it should be used and sold. But when you can get them out there in front of the customer, with the customer, sitting down, learning, that just that decreases the time to a successful contribution and revenue. Then the product knowledge they gain that is immense.
And I know some people are out there saying, yep, this is obvious. You should go in and talk to customers and you should ask customers questions. And they've heard us say that a couple of different times in different episodes of the podcast. And you get into this idea of actually seeing the customer use the product. It may seem obvious, but there are very few of you who actually do it. This becomes a great way for you to separate yourself from the norm in your space. Go in there and actually work through the use cases with your customer, not the ones that marketing has put together, not the ones that you've put together as an internal sales team. Go through that practical application. So as we shift gears and we talk a little bit more about the science side of it, how would you describe what do you mean by science in sales?
Well, you start with the numbers, right? That's really where the data comes from. Well, let's talk about data instead of numbers, because data can be numbers or something else. But it's really all about the data. And with the explosion, simply a massive explosion in technology for not just the marketing space, but the sales space over the last 5 years, the amount of data to analyze and sift through is just tremendous. So when I talk about the science, it's actually having the ability to uncover the story that the data is telling, and then understanding how to take that information and put it into practical use. That's the science piece of sales. And again, some sales leaders and sales reps that I speak with and work with, they like to focus in on one or the other. And frankly, you're missing out. So it's tough. Me personally, I'm the art kind of guy. I much rather get in and dig into an opportunity and strategize with management and sales reps about how to close a deal. That's the art. But if you can take yourself out of that and put it into the data stuff and analyze the data and look at the spreadsheets, it's only going to help. So that's really what it is. The science piece, Mike, is the data.
So what are some of the common mistakes that companies make when it comes to analyzing data or even thinking about data?
Well, I would probably say that one of the biggest problems is just doing what's already being done, I guess is a way to put it. So there's a lot of sales enablement tools out there that, will help sales BDRs and SDRs, and sales reps run sales cadences. For instance, an example would be, let's run a 10 touch cadence over a 3-week time frame that includes 3 emails and 1 social touch and 2 phone calls or whatever they could be, right? So just creating those cadences or creating that process and just running it with not actually understanding what works and then breaking down what works by different dimensions of the sales process, including the size of the organization you're trying to penetrate or close, or the personas that you're attempting to work with. Those cadences all should vary depending on the dimension of your sales process there, if that makes sense.
One of the keys there that resonated with me is that whole idea of many people going in and saying, having this preconceived notion of this is the kind of data I need to be looking at, rather than looking at data on the whole and letting the data tell a story or the data speak to you inside the organization. Can you describe some situations where you've seen organizations combine both the art of sales and the science of sales together to be really successful?
Yeah, I sure can. So let's think about, again, we know what the art of sales is, and highly encourage everybody to practice those. When it comes to the art of sales, I like to think about it, and this is language from the company I worked for called FunnelWise, and we relate it to sports and maybe even more specific football, and we call them plays, running a play or having a playbook for each stage of the funnel or the sales process. So of course you can train your sales reps in the art of science, but let's talk about maybe a specific example where marketing has created some demand and nurtured this lead to warm them up, and they've now thrown the lead over the wall to sales. We'll call it an MQL, a marketing qualified lead. That's a common acronym, but not everybody uses it. At some point, there's a lead that's been warmed up and thrown over the wall to sales. One of the ways to look at it is when to call, how often to call, and how does that vary by the who. So let's talk about the time from a first activity on a lead. And oftentimes what's the word I'm looking for? The service level agreement between marketing and sales will be, okay, this lead scored this point, so it has to be followed up within 5 hours or 24 hours or what have you. But that's really the only part of the service level agreement. You need to go deeper than that. You need to look at how many times it's called and when it's called, and understanding when the probability of scheduling a meeting or creating an opportunity is the highest. Because there's a certain point where the quantity stops paying dividends. I'll give you an example. We worked with a company where we analyzed, about 2,500 workable leads. And we found that after the 5th phone call, the likelihood of scheduling a meeting just leveled off. So it didn't matter if they called them 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11 times, that percentage was all the same. Mm-hmm. So it was, hey, call each one at least 5 times. Because we knew that was where the point of diminishing return started happening, if that makes sense. I kind of rambled there a little bit.
No, I think it's a really good point on getting back into your data and being able to say, okay, for this specific use case, for this specific persona, for this specific customer profile that we're talking to, or even for the product that we're selling into, there is going to be some math around number of touches, number of outreach. And, I am one of those people who is very skeptical when it comes to applying too much math to sales, only because I know the dangers in it, and I know how some of the data can be manipulated. How, if you focus too much on the number of emails that are sent out, you find yourself with a lot of emails and not a lot of actual discussions with clients. So,
that's a good point. And I think you have a question for me there. So let's take a step back. Instead of talking about the exact math, let's talk about the questions that should be asked when you're analyzing your data, because it is much more than math. That's a really good point. I'm going to talk about the handoff again, or the handoff playbooks. There's 4 questions that should really, at least 4 questions that should be asked. And one is, what are the right number of follow-ups once the MQL is generated to maximize the odds of moving forward? We kind of talked about that.
Yep.
When do those interactions need to occur? How do those actions change based on the persona or the prospect, right? There's different levels. You could have your entry-level your entry-level practitioner, or you could have the champion of your product or the executive sponsor, and those handoff actions differ depending on the prospect is. So good point. It's not just about the math. There's other questions you should answer first.
So as you think about other things beyond those questions in the data that you should be asking, what else should we be thinking about when it comes to, one of the things that comes to mind here just through this conversation is that communication between marketing and sales and having a general alignment. How do you manage that, or what's worked well for you in your experience in that area?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. The industry's changed. If I've kind of grown up in sales, marketing used to be responsible for brand awareness and creating some fantastic slicks and product information to leave behind. And now, as their budgets grow significantly, they're being tasked from the C-level, from the executive and the C-level, to say, hey, what am I getting in return? What revenue are you affecting in return for all this money you're spending? So marketing leaders are being held accountable for revenue now. And that really, the old sales and marketing alignment, right? Marketing always says, hey, I'm throwing stuff over the wall. You're not working it properly. And sales says, hey, the leads stink. Well, there's always going to be some level of friction. Or maybe even the word conflict is a good word to use here, because conflict isn't always a bad thing. Like heated conflict, angry conflict is a bad thing, but sitting down and having reasonable conversations about how things are being viewed differently, that type of conflict, that's healthy. And I think marketing and sales organizations that sit down regularly to look at the information or look at the leads that marketing is handing off to sales, so sales can give good feedback to them on what's working, what's not. And then going even deeper, understanding what sales is doing with those leads and how marketing content and interaction affects those opportunities as they move through the sales process. They really need to sit down and have a regular cadence of meetings for that, to cover that kind of information.
Yeah, when you talk about healthy conflict, how would you, let's say you're in a scenario where the conflict isn't healthy inside the organization, how would you look to help overcome something like that?
Definitely experienced that myself. And interesting enough, there was a book that we read together, marketing and sales and even support all read together. And again, this is from a previous place of employment, but it was called Crucial Conversations.
Yep.
Are you familiar with the book Crucial Conversations?
I am. Yep.
Yeah. Opinions vary, emotions are high, and the stakes the emotions are strong and the stakes are high. I mean, that definitely illustrates marketing and sales conversations right there. So you need to have a good understanding of the role and responsibilities for your peers and other organizations, and then give each other the benefit of the doubt, because I'm pretty sure that any marketing leader I've ever worked with wants the organization to be successful and wants us to sell more, even though it might not always appear that way with how the conversations are going. So be calm, be cool, collected, respect your peer, and give them the benefit of the doubt. I think it's a good approach anytime you're having a heated conversation.
Yeah, and remember, you're all wearing the same jersey, or you're all wearing the same uniform, or you're all wearing the same logo, or you have the same logo on your business cards. I mean, there's a common sense of purpose you probably have with that person on the other side as it relates to the commitment that you have to the organization you're both working at. And if you don't have that commitment to the organization you're both working at, then maybe you shouldn't work there anymore. But if you do have the commitment to the organization, then you should at least look at that as common ground. For me, I've always found when I'm trying to manage conflict, and I'm not great at managing conflict. I don't mind conflict. I think it is very healthy. I think it's important to be transparent when I go through this process. But then again, I tend to be pretty direct. when I go through this process, what I try to do is find common ground. And many times it's through asking those questions like, what does such and such mean to them? Or what are their objectives? How do those objectives align with objectives that we're currently working on? Where do those ultimately align with the business objectives? And then those conversations become a little bit easier. Most of the time when the conflict is ugly is when the goals and objectives are not aligned properly. And that's one of the things I'm excited about to hear you talk about marketing having a higher level of accountability toward revenue instead of just numbers coming into the organization, so that the squishy leads, hey, I've got X number, I've got website traffic. Well, how does website traffic convert to revenue?
Yeah. And that's a great comment. Being in sales for 20 plus years, I'm excited about that as well, that marketers are now starting to have ownership in pipeline and revenue. For sales leaders, it's important to remember we're really comfortable with that. As a matter of fact, we talked about it at the beginning of the podcast, Mike, as sales and sales leaders, we're really comfortable being measured on pipeline and revenue. Marketers are still learning how to accept that. So just, be aware of that too, and help walk your peers through how to be successful when you're measured that way. Again, patience and benefit of the doubt.
So as we kind of look toward the future here, what does the sales professional of tomorrow look like from your perspective?
Oh man, isn't this, it's a great profession. You always have to be on your toes and trying to improve. Somebody told me one time, it's like being on a train track. You're never standing still. You're either moving forward or getting ran over. And if you think that you're standing still, you're probably getting ran over. And it's interesting that you asked that question. A few weeks ago, I was at a technology company's annual kickoff meeting, get together and get the troops fired up. And one of the speakers I heard, her name was Jill Rowley. And if you know anything about Jill, she's really well respected in the space and just seen as an industry leader. She fully supports marketers to taking the reins of pipeline and revenue and has been a good proponent of that. She talked about the traits of a modern seller. So this isn't, I wished I was coming up with this myself, but I'm completely plagiarizing from Jill Rowley. Give her a follow on Twitter and connect with her on LinkedIn. But there's 6 traits that, a modern seller is going to need to be good at. One is, we've been talking about it, they need to leverage data. And again, there's lots of ways to do that with all the technology that's out there. They need to seek collaboration. And you've heard the old term 4-legged meeting. So instead of going into a meeting on your own, always have somebody there with you that is an expert that can help, whether it's with the product the prospect is looking at or the industry that they're in. So seeking collaboration, communicate effectively. That's so important, to communicate effectively. And I always encourage the folks that I work with to double and triple check any of their written communication and just think about how the other person's going to receive the information. Exhibit business acumen. I think that's always important. Gone are the days of, what's what I'm looking to say, like just go out there and having a good time, going golfing or taking your prospects to dinner. I mean, you really need to exhibit some business acumen, share new ideas, always be thinking about ways to improve yourself, improve the leadership, improve your organization. And then lastly, embrace technology because, man, the way things are going, it's certainly not going to change. We've got artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's the hot topics right now. So really get your arms around that technology. And if you're an old dog like me, try and learn some new tricks.
Yeah, it is one of the things that's really exciting about what Jill has put out there and what you've described is really orienting the engagement that you have with customers based on what customers need, understanding their business, being able to provide insights, and taking a customer-oriented approach rather than falling into the habit that most either early career sales reps have or some older sales reps who just haven't been able to break the habit of always diving into the product pitch.
That's right. The root of all sales evil is poor discovery.
It absolutely is. And we talk about it in the context of qualification. So when you think of discovery, what comes to mind on your side? Any tips or best practices you can share with the audience on
oh my goodness,
good discovery?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to go back to a word I used earlier, patience. You hit on it. Oftentimes, sales will ask a question or two about discovery or qualification, then just jump right in the pitch and
man, you want to reach across the table and say, no, stop.
So patience is the right way. It's, I think I've seen some studies out there where during discovery, if the prospect's talking 60% of the time or more, then your chances to close a deal increase twofold. So yeah, just being patient. Don't jump right. You hit the nail on the head. Don't jump right in the product pitch. Really take the time to understand what's going on and the problems they're experiencing to see if you can help.
Steve, this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much for sharing the time and your expertise with the audience. If people want to find out more about you and what you're up to and want to connect with you directly, what's the best place for them to do that?
I always appreciate growing my network. Business is a small world and forever is a long time. And just look me up on LinkedIn, Steve Wil in Des Moines, Iowa. I'll be happy to grab a connection or connect with you, grab a cup of coffee, lunch, whatever works. So Steve Wil on LinkedIn, it'd be great to connect.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. This has been such a good interview. And thank you, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.